Perfect.
Awesome. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started then. If you guys are here for the travel information meeting remote session, then you are in the right spot. So just to start, we're going to go ahead and start with policy reminders, and then we're going to move more into potential new policies. So the first things that I'll be discussing will be things that are actually already out there, that are already policy. So nothing that you need to really change. It's mostly more of a kind of educational and reminder session. You hit the next slide.
Mhm.
All right, so the first thing we're going to discuss is the relocation tax change. So this actually came out at the beginning of this year. It's something that we were notified by the tax office. So I believe it had to do something with tax code change. But how this affects travel is there's a bit of a connection between relocation costs and travel expenses. Previously, there were travel expenses, certain travel expenses that were reimbursable, but also not taxable. And with the recent changes, essentially everything is now taxable. And this has to do with expenses that are incurred after January 1st. So if you're doing any reimbursements this year, but the expenses were incurred last year in 2017, it would not affect this. And essentially departments are being encouraged to use different modules than they've used before. I know previously things have been going through e-travel because there were things that were non-taxable, and the e-travel system is built for business expenses that are non-taxable. And so departments are being encouraged to use the one-time payment method through Workday. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're running into these relocation expenses. If you have any very specific questions, there's a chance we would need to connect you with the tax office to figure out the best way to handle it. Next, thank you. The next thing, just briefly going to discuss meal per diem time/meals. So what this is talking about is when our travelers are coming off travel status and when they're entering travel status, based on when that is happening, what meals are being provided. So if they end their trip at 10 a.m. And they were traveling all day the day before, what meals are they going to get? We noticed that our website was a little confusing and not very clear in the way that this information is presented. So kind of what we did was just cleaned it up and created a couple new charts, hopefully to avoid some of that confusion. And so this is something that Ariba actually automatically does. So it's not super important if you're doing these meal per diem reimbursements on e-travel. Ariba actually knows how to calculate this automatically for you. But if you're trying to do any sort of like price forecasting or looking into the future, like, okay, that traveler comes off at 5 p.m., what meal are they going to get? So I'm not going to go into too much detail on this chart, but just so you know, we cleaned it up and we will be adding this to the website. So if you're ever wondering, you know, exactly what meals they get based on times, that information will be there for you. The next thing is this recently came out. I believe it was in the middle of May, was our e-travel wire payment changes. So previously, how wire payments were handled through e-travel was if you went to the print version of the report is where you would get all this little chart on where to fill out the different wire details. And so the first change was that we removed this. Sorry, 1 second, there we go. And the next change was after removing that, what we did was we added this little wire info section below where you select wire payment. And essentially what it does is it links out to the accounts payable wire page. And from there, what the wire team added was a wire form. So instead of those print details, what you'll need to be doing is going to that website and downloading that PDF form and then typing out the information for the wire payment and then attaching it to the expense report. The one thing that accounts payable has been emphasizing is to please type that information. The reason for that is a lot of times they're getting information that's handwritten, either from the traveler or from the department, where they're trying to interpret the information and handwrite it. And by the time it gets to accounts payable, it can be very hard to read and interpret. For example, I think they've accidentally sent payments to the wrong accounts because a 7 looked like a 1, things like that. So they're just emphasizing that you use that form and that you type the information. So by the time it gets to the actual payment, it's nice and clear on where that money's going to. And then the final thing is the instruction for how to handle the wire fee has been removed. And the reason for that, it is now automatic. So previously you could go on the expense report and say, hey, I want this budget to be charged the wire fee and so forth. And essentially what the difference is now, like I said, it's automatic. And what it is it's based on proportion to how much money is being charged on budget A and budget B, budget C within the expense report. So on this slide, we just presented just a little bit of an example, one that's pretty easy to understand on how that proportion works. So the example is if budget A is charged $100, budget B is charged $50, so the entire expense report was $150. The wire fee will be allocated proportionally relative to those expenses. So $10 of the wire fee is going to be charged to the $100 expense budget, and then $5 will be charged to budget B. And so the wire fee total is $15, and so that's how it gets broken apart. And the next section is going to be policy clarification, kind of similar, but a little more in depth on actual policies that we wanted to add a little bit of clarification on. The first one is business class, first class justification. So nothing is changing with this. It still requires an approval from a dean, vice president, vice provost. But what we are adding to the website that we realized was missing is that these written approvals must acknowledge the business justification for the upgrade. So the problem we've run into is we're seeing things being attached that just say, I approve, and it's not very clear from an audit standpoint what they're actually approving. And so we just wanted to add the clarification that make sure that these approvals are accompanied by a justification. If it ever gets pulled in an audit, it's going to be important that the department's able to communicate what that justification is. The last thing that I'll be discussing as far as reminders is conference agenda, brochure, and meals. I'm sure this is something you guys deal with a lot. We get lots of questions about, how this gets handled. And so this policy is something that is already implied through our policies, but we just want to emphasize the importance on what this review should look like. And so travelers and departments are responsible for retaining documentation that justifies the meals claimed during a conference, meeting, and trip. Is recommended to attach this documentation to the expense report. So it's actually not required that you attach these agendas. We do get that question quite often, but we do recommend it. The reason for that is from an audit standpoint, and we've been told this by internal audit, it's something they do check for. When an auditor comes in and they want to know exactly what meals were provided, the department needs to back that up. So they run into a case like, why is the traveler at this conference and they're receiving all the meals where none of them offered or anything like that. So just make sure in your review process that this is something you keep in mind and that you are retaining the documentation for this because you could be asked for it in the future. And now I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Robert and start jumping into some data and the potential future changes. Thank you.
Okay, so this is Robert speaking now. Let me answer the question that was asked in the chat, which was what would be an upgrade justification example. We generally don't have a list of what's reasonable, what's not. We just say there has to be a benefit to the department. Sometimes it's hard to say what is or what isn't because some benefits may be intangible. But a good example is, which is pretty clear cut, is when if maybe a medical unit is bringing in someone from the World Health Organization and they need business class. They're saying that they're going to only come, if they're going to fly halfway around the world, they want business class to come to a talk. And that program, has advertised this talk as one of the selling points, to faculty and students. It may be very beneficial to have that person come and pay for that business class. Paying just for normal business may not be advisable because there's not be no way to prove that there is a benefit monetarily or in public perception to the university long term. So these are just some of the things. We generally don't judge them unless they are very obvious. And yes, like a medical reason as well. So they need a medical exception as well. So let me get into some data. So this is in the spirit of the World Cup. This is just some instructions on what each slide is really saying, in case once you get it, you can understand what it's saying if you wanted to share with other people. This information here is based on department. So just some overview department. I know it's not very exact, but you can see that for P2I and P card, we just do for expense reports, but we've included additional information because I'm sure that people would ask us, how about other things? So P2I here, the top 10 departments in spend dollars in total. So you may see yourself on here. You may be surprised to see some departments on here. It's really based on their business needs. So it's a good example to see what each department's big needs are here. P card and CTA data were also combined. So I wasn't able to split that out, but you can see, of course, athletics would be a big stakeholder, Department of Medicine. And P2I is payment to individual, in case anyone needs to know. Applied physics laboratory. Then you go into e-reimbursements and e-travel. You can see it's kind of similar in a way, but near the top. But you can see that there is a big difference in dollars spent based on the type of work they do, such as like social work may do a lot of mileage. It may not be a lot of actually conference travel, maybe lots and lots of mileage, ground transportation. Same thing for APL. They may be doing a lot of travel for meetings, for federal grants and such, research. So it's just some interesting information for you guys here. It's based on dollars spent. The next slides here are actually org level, I believe. So at this level, we're looking at increase. So increase may not be actually a big dollar amount, but it just shows to us there's a change in their business needs. So we may use this data to actually reach out to departments to see if they're having any issues, because we can see that maybe they've only spent like $10 in expense reports for 3 years, and this year they have $2,000, which may be a huge change in their business culture in their department. So you look at the CP2I data, the top 3 increase, the top 3 decrease, P card, top 3 increased and decrease. I'll send these out as well. So if you're on here, you may be interested to share this with your department. E-reimbursement and e-travel. These are things that we're a little bit more interested in for us. And we do know that a lot of these have been combined or separated in the last 2 years, so it may not be exact, but it is good for us to know that people are doing certain things differently now. And this list here is the top 10 compliance denials. So this is kind of like almost like our yearly Hall of Fame, kind of people that put in a lot of hard work denying. I know people do a lot of good hard work. Sometimes departments are new to Ariba, or there's a big culture change or different process change, and they're doing the tough work of denying expense reports. We know that when you deny expense report, you're making double, triple work for everyone involved. So it can be a really difficult process. So we want to just appreciate these people. This is basically minus me and Kelly, which are at the top, but for all at the department level, we really appreciate it. Of course, there are other people doing hard work, so I don't want to make people feel like they're not doing anything, but we just wanted to highlight the top 10.
I know. I'm not on it.
And then let's get into policy changes.
Yeah. What if they're new?
I'll answer some of the questions that you guys asked earlier after too, so I did not forget. Is there a problem with the sound? Any participants? Okay, I just clicked mute all, so hopefully that will fix that. Okay. Drivers fly. You know, the previous policy that it has to be attached to the expense report if they're basically crossing a boundary, you know, a political geopolitical boundary like a state or a country. This documentation will no longer be required on the expense report. Most economical means of travel is a requirement in the pre-trip approval process. Travel approver is responsible in ensuring that personal preferences did not increase costs. I mean, there will be some work on the compliance side, very little, you know, in case it's very obvious. For instance, if a traveler wants to go from Seattle to Orlando for a conference, but they're also going to take their family, taking their family is fine. But if they also want to take their vehicle in a minivan and get mileage from Seattle to Orlando, that would obviously be a reason why a personal preference in affecting costs. So that would not be allowed. But we're hoping that really the responsibility should be on the front end for the travel approver. They're the ones that responsible for the travel budgets, and they're the ones that should be ensuring that personal preference did not affect the cost. So you will not have to attach documentation to the expense report. You may still require it for the pre-approval process. So we're going to have definitely people that are going to require the documentation for the pre-approval, but it's not going to be necessary on our end. If we will not deny it if we didn't see a mileage comparison or airfare comparison. Yes, and for some locations where borders are very close and stuff, this is all kind of stuff that we're hoping that won't be an issue anymore, Eileen. Yes, this will all be on the webpage after this. We'll be updating the webpage right after this presentation. Personal time airfare comparison. So in the past, our guidance has always been round trip, mainly because airlines have been pricing their airfare round trip. But the last year or two, they've been more changing to leg per leg. I think it makes it a little easier for them to price per leg. So when it's like $100 each way, then if you click on round trip, it just tells you $200. They don't give you an additional discount for doing the round trip generally. And actually it allows them to actually increase their profits by maximizing profits on per leg travel. So we're going to change our guidance to say that one leg comparisons are allowable. We have not been denying a lot of this when we do see that the calculations are correct already. So we just wanted to make it official and say that the one leg is allowed. Just make sure that the calculations are correct. So an example here would be if someone went on personal time to a location, but each leg is itemized out. So you know that from here to the business location is one price. From the business location back is one price. You can just do, if the personal time is at the back end, you can just do the trip back from business location back to Seattle as one leg. What would have been if they came back after the end of business instead of doing the round trip. It's just an option, because I know a lot of times a traveler may provide you the one leg comparison and people are denying it back saying we want the round trip because that was our previous guidance. That will not have to happen anymore. And a round trip is still okay, it's fine as well. We're not saying that that's not okay. We're just trying to make it easier to say either or depending on the situation. So travel status. So the previous two are effective basically immediately, and this one will be effective July 1st. So this is just a rewrite of a previous policy from the state policy. The previous policy was you have to be in travel status, you need the 50-mile rule. That has not changed, but the 3-hour rule has changed. So it previously said 3 hours beyond your normal working hours. There was some anxiety over what normal working hours means, especially for professional staff or nursing staff or anybody else that has shifts that are not considered an 8-hour shift, especially medical professionals or research professionals. So there's been a change, and the change is that basically it needs to be 11 hours worked. So this is not, of course, is not an entitlement. If the department elects to reimburse the travel expenses, this is mainly comes up during one-day travel. So if they leave in the morning, come back in the evening, how do we determine if they're eligible for meals? This is how you would do it. Generally, it's not a problem with lodging. So it's 11 hours for a day or a trip. It'd be 11 hours if it's, of course, crossing over multiple days. Basically, it's 11 hours for the trip. Generally, we don't see it as when it crosses the day line, because if it's overnight, I mean, they're technically working or on travel status during that time as well. So it's usually easy for them to qualify for meals and lodging. But this is generally for the same day kind of situation. Like if they leave in the morning, come back in the evening, how do we determine if they qualify? This is how you would do it. So 11 hours, the only detail you need to know really is that meal time is not included in 11 hours. So 8 to 5 is 8 hours of work, assuming an hour lunch. And then the thing that the state wants to avoid is if they go 8 to 5 to a location like Bellingham, and then they take dinner from 5 to 7, and they drive back for an hour, 7 to 8. That's not 11 hours. That's not something we're going to require as documentation. This is something that's going to be required basically in the pre-trip approval process, that they understand that this is an 11-hour requirement if they're requesting for a meal per diem. So you may run into situations where they didn't request this on the beginning, on the front end, but on the back end, they may feel entitled to it. And you may have to deny it, saying, or ask them, did you work 11 hours? Subtract meal time. Did you work 11 hours? And then as long as they have their travel approval from their supervisor or whoever their approver is, it would be fine. Here's this is actually just one last slide for potential policy change, and then I'll answer some questions in the chat. This is the deadline thing that we've talked about in the past. There's currently no deadline. There's no statute of limitations. There still will be no statute of limitations on any requests for reimbursement, for travel reimbursement, but this is the potential language we're looking at. The reimbursement must be submitted in Ariba or to your finance office within 2 months from the end of the business trip. Exception will require traveler signature and claim the allowable justification, which is what we're working on right now. And the list will be very similar to like change fee allowances, like a medical reason or something like that. And we're going to ask that this is from the end of the business trip. So, we understand that people may go to multiple locations, or they may work for one assignment for one department and another assignment for another department, a different department, back to back. We understand that. So at the end of their business trip, they'll have 2 months to submit this documentation either through Ariba or to your office. And this will be for everybody. This is actually a IRS policy, so it's not something that's just strictly just for UW employees. It is for all travel reimbursements. The IRS regulation requires that the person requesting for a reimbursement do so during a reasonable time period. The IRS says that 60 days is reasonable. We're allowed to make our own, but if you stick to their policy, we don't have anything to worry about. There's nothing for us to justify. So it is possible that the 2 months could be greater. We thought 2 months would be better than 60 days because it might be easier to understand. For the mileage, yes, it actually does apply. And I know they submit it every 6 months. It does apply for that as well. We are looking to a possibility for ground transportation to be different only for mileage. We are considering it to be a different because it may be better overall administrative burden wise. But we just want to make sure there's no confusion. We don't want to have a different policy out there. You say 6 months and everyone else said, well, I thought it was 6 months, but it was really 2 months. So we are considering all those things. If you have those concerns, please email us so that we can take all those into consideration. We do understand that one, James. We are actually looking into that one. We're also looking into the reasons for exceptions. Another question that we got in the in-person meeting was how come it's not 2 months for being processed instead of being submitted? We did think about that, and we thought that it would be unreasonable burden on fiscal staff because there would be no way to control or enforce the submitters from submitting it on time for fiscal staff to submit it through Ariba within time. So if our deadline was 60 days, we could already see many scenarios where people were submitting it on the 60th day and then putting lots of pressure on central administration to get that in and processed that same day. So we didn't think that was reasonable. We want to make sure that this is something that's borne by the traveler, not as much. There's going to be a little bit, but minimize the burden on central administration. So if it's going to be over, especially so there are probably two different processes for employees. Hopefully we want to try to build something into Ariba automatically. So, did they meet the 60-day requirement? Yes or no? If they did not, then maybe it'll automatically, flag it for taxation. It'll be taxed. So there'll be amount withheld from their next paycheck. So we're looking into that. And then for non-UW, there may be a secondary process that we may have to do because we would probably want to withhold the amount before the payment goes out instead of collecting it on the back end. Yes, Eileen, this will be department responsibility. We'll also have this on our website. Yes, it will be widely disseminated as well. So one thing to note is that we're hoping to get this done and up and going in the next 3 months. There's, as you can imagine, there's probably a lot of political hurdles for us getting this approved because no one really wants this. Us, we really don't technically want the headaches with this, but something we have to do. And then if we do that with next 3 months, we would make it official. Even though this should be being done, should really be done all the time because of IRS regulation, we will be more enforcement mode starting probably January 2019. And we'll definitely let you know next travel meeting if it's been delayed because we're not getting the approvals that we need. One thing to note is that we are trying to work with the state on this because the state is looking to implement something similar. So we're hoping that we can try to take the driver's seat in this and try to make something that works for us before they take action. Because if they take action before we do, it's going to be a lot harder to fit our business needs within this policy. So we are trying to be more proactive with this in case they have some policy where it has to be reimbursed within 60 days or something. It may make it a lot more difficult for us. So just keep that in mind. While we're getting these approvals, that's one thing that we're battling from both ends is that the state is implementing something and, obviously we're not the biggest fans of this, and also for the exception process, we did have questions about that in in-person meeting about who would be responsible for this. It would be the traveler. So the traveler would sign off on it because it would be their tax liability. We are talking to Kyle Richard in office to make sure that this is something that could be, the burden can be shifted to the traveler. And then if they sign something, then they know that they have to claim it or whatnot and be their responsibility. So we're looking into that option as well. We're looking into a lot of options to try to make it as least turbulent as possible for everyone on campus.
You want to touch on how it might affect other modules? You got a couple questions about that.
So we did a question about e-reimbursement. Does it affect e-reimbursement? It does not at this moment. I believe the IRS policy technically applies to all business expenses that are being reimbursed, but within our scope, we're only working on travel. Will previous travel be grandfathered? Yes, technically it will be grandfathered. Yes. That's what we're hoping to get it done by the beginning of the school year, around that time, so that people will know that when they're getting ready for things later in the year. It's also possible that if we get it ready, then we maybe started at the beginning of the next biennium. That way when people do new budgeting for the new budgets, then they'll know that going forward, this will be the rule. And maybe it might be useful for departments to leverage this, saying that this is going to be in place, start using it before the biennium. We want to get it before the biennium so people can start using it to force people to get things in. Yes. Yeah, we're hoping that you would have it all implemented within your pre-approval process. We're trying, that's as you can see in all of our policies, we're really trying to focus on shifting some of these burdens to the pre-approval process instead of everyone trying to fix these issues on the back end. Because it really, we've had conversations with the state and they've told us that we're doing too much on the back end to ensure compliance. A lot of that is really the burden of the approver, the person that's responsible for the budget and the person that's responsible for actually approving the travel in the first place. So a lot of these things may be shifted to the front end. And I'm sorry that I know a lot of you guys may have to change your pre-approval forms and stuff, but we hope that it'll be well worth it so that you have less work on the back end. Let me see some questions from before. If they receive food in business class, do they have to provide documentation? No, they do not. The only time they will need to do that is if it's a different expense, like if it's itemized out. That we wouldn't pay. If it's all grouped into the one fare, then it's fine. It's not considered a meal, actually. Does anyone have any more questions? Try to keep it short. We also did have presentations from Alaska Airlines and CBT. I know that we don't have that for you guys, but Kelly will be working on a short presentation, recorded, send it out to you guys. Yes, the slides will be sent out as well. Kelly's going to work on this recording to be sent out on and posted to YouTube like you did last time. We'll send out the slides as well. The question is, when encountering a taxable travel situation, is a payment done through Ariba and taxes withheld, or the taxes come out of the paychecks? Yes, the Ariba system for us, the e-travel, does not have anything built in it to flag for anything that's taxable. Because that's apparently it's very extremely complex. We have looked into that. It's very complex for them to build that in. So currently the process is to pay it through Ariba and then report it to payroll. This is for UW employees, and report to payroll. So that's the current process. So it will become out of their paychecks. We are exploring different options for this in the future. We definitely are. We don't know what's going to happen. Maybe there might be a taxable check mark. Maybe we generate a report and send it on behalf of the departments, like every week to payroll. Or it can be maybe new one-time payment in the Workday system. But we also don't want to shift a lot of this kind of work over to Workday ISC for, if it is something that we can handle in-house. It'd be kind of irresponsible for us to just shift it over just because it's taxable. If we can do it in-house, we will. But yeah, currently Ariba does not do any withholding or any of that kind of reporting. Okay, the last thing I have is through the GDPR thing for the European data privacy. You will see some changes coming through for how our consent form looks like on the end of the signature page for non-UW people. There may be some other changes as well. I think we have to make some changes to the wire form, possibly. So we have to add consent language to a lot of things. So we will be adding that. You will see some changes come through, hopefully through Ariba and other things. Anyone have any more questions? Well, what was Hazel's question? Can someone touch on Hazel's question? Oh, I'm sorry. I had a faculty fly to California early morning to attend a meeting and fly back that evening. So during this time, he is not eligible for meal reimbursement. He can be if he's worked 11 hours. So the transportation time does count as well. So basically he started from whenever he left to the airport, right? So if you came to the work, then you do it from work. If you went from home, started from what time he left from home to the airport, and then ended when he gets back home, And if you think that's about 11 hours worked in total, then yes, he would be eligible for meal per diem. Actually, there is a discussion. I'm actually a huge proponent of the 75% of first and last day of travel to make it easier. I think Teresa and Kelly here can attest to that. I basically complain about that all the time. I think
like it too, so.
Yeah. Yes, it is something we would love to do, but we cannot with the current Ariba setup. We are actually exploring it with the Ariba team to see what can be done to make it work in the system. But that is something we're looking into for sure. It's high on our list, maybe number 2 on our list, beyond taxable travel, on things that we're trying to figure out how to make a better process for everyone, because we know it's very difficult. It's actually not an IRS requirement for that one, as long as we have, because basically we're itemized, we're being more detailed than the IRS requirement, so it's actually allowable because we have looked into that. But we would prefer to do the 75%, so that way there's no confusion or complaints about, oh, I deserve this or I want this. You can just clearly say 75% first day, last day of travel, and then omit the meals in between that they had provided. Yes, very good point. But yes, we are looking into that. If you guys have any of these kind of suggestions as well, please feel free to let us know. Yeah. Yes, I believe so. 75% is just 75%. I think that they do have a proportional rate. So if you look at the data set from the GSA for per diem, they do have what they call proportional per diem. And then you can actually split it out breakfast, lunch, dinner from there as well. So that is a question too. Like if they do have 75% of that day, if they had breakfast provided, we may have to omit that possibly. But it may also be possible that if we just say 75% first and last day, it could be allowed in full. It's basically like you've been sitting next to our desk last year listening to our conversation. Yeah. But I actually think that it may be just flat, to be honest, because they're getting 75% already. I think that's taking into account things that might be provided or not getting all the meals. We're going to stay on for a little bit if anyone has any more questions, but I think that people have no more questions. Then we can end this presentation here. So we appreciate everyone coming on, and please, of course, as always, feel free to send us, any concerns you have, any ideas, anything. We do take all of them seriously, and we do add them to our list of things business requirements that you guys have.